Hey guys, it's Ethan from Zimmer Labs, and I want to do a video showing you guys the speakers that I just finished building. This is something that I don't get to do enough of, in my opinion, because, not that I'm complaining, but lightsabers is what I mostly do these days. But I didn't start out that way. I started out doing custom electronics and mostly audio. You know, it started as car stereos and home theaters, and you know, then I got into building speakers and amplifiers, turntables. I started branching into cameras, and then lightsabers really captured my attention. But a couple months back I decided that I really wanted to pick up some JBL L100s, the new ones, the L100 Classics. I'll show you guys what I'm talking about in a bit when I change the camera around, but basically back in the day, JBL released some, they're not tower speakers, but tower speakers that had, you know, your 12-inch woofer, a mid-range, and a tweeter that were, you know, standard old school vintage retro big clunky squares that sold. I think they're the highest selling speaker JBL ever made, I'm pretty sure. And they sounded great. They weren't the best speaker they ever made, but they were the highest selling speaker they ever made, so, you know. But recently they've re-released them as kind of a retro vintage classic L100 re-release, and they're really nice. They actually are pretty incredible sounding speakers, so I was thinking about picking up a pair. So I thought, well, why not build some? And I thought, if I'm going to build some, why not make them better? So I did the work and the research, kind of figured out how they went together and what, you know, what they were built with, what components, what the specs were, the crossover frequencies, the different drivers that were involved, and how they kind of work together. And I did my own measurements, calculations, and I put together some cabinets, and I built them. And basically, my goal here was to have something that was as good or better sounding, you know, but also try to stick to the aesthetic, the vintage retro look. But without further ado, here they are. This is the front end. This is the back end. Hopefully, as you guys can see, I will show you guys a better close-up shortly. But as you can see, they are a blue stained oak. And when I say oak, I mean solid oak. They are made 100% of solid oak paneling, not plywood, but genuine, just straight up oak. The JBLs that I modeled them after are, they're either particle board or plywood with some decent oak veneers on them, but these guys are just solid oak. You could throw these down the stairs and they won't break. The first thing that I really wanted to do was to kind of get the grills right, and as you can see, these are super just architectural designs, and the reason for that is because JBLs have the grills on the JBL 100s they're called Quadrex foam. Basically, they're a whole bunch of squares that have a flat front, but they what they are is triangles with the tops nipped off so that they're square, and a little JBL logo down here, and they're just so perfectly vintage and retro. They're just exactly what you would think of if you're thinking of 1950s, 60s, maybe 70s, probably more 50s and 60s. But that's like the thing about them that I really personally like the most. They're really bright, vibrant orange or blue, you know, color, and just kind of in-your-face design, while at the same time being a simple retro square. So that's kind of what I was shooting for here. I couldn't get the Quadrex foam to do the front covers. Couldn't find it for sale anywhere. But what I did find was acoustic foam. So this is basically, you know, soundproofing material that you would see in a studio. I just figured, hey, it's perfect because they are transparent. You know, there's nothing to block the sound, and they look the part, and you can get them in just about any color. So I ordered orange, blue, black, and white. I did end up going with the blue, the light blue, to match the dark blue stain. And I ended up using the red and black on the inside rather than using, what's the foam called? You know, hobby store foam that people use to stuff boxes with. I figured I might as well use the extra acoustic foam that I had left over that I didn't use for the grills on the inside. So if you look through the ports, it's actually kind of cool looking inside. You see the red triangles kind of all throughout the inside of the box. But the drivers themselves, the top two are the same as the JBL L100s. So these are the JBL JT025 Ti1s, the tweeters. Then the mid-range driver is the same. It's a 4.5 inch. It's an L5 driver, but it's not exactly an L5 driver. I think it's a L105 or a 105H, something like that. But it's essentially the same driver as they've always used in the L100s, which is the L05. But I did do a bit of an upgrade on the woofer. The woofer that comes in the JBL 100s is, I'm forgetting what the designation serial number is, but I got a dual voice coil 2 ohm 1200 watt max just monster woofer to go in here, and it's essentially the same exact driver that they used in the L100 Classic, but with larger magnet, bigger voice coils, so it can handle more power and can push more air, and so therefore can kick harder, sounds louder, and can really pound bass if you want it to. But the beauty of dual voice coils is that you don't have to. You don't have to have obnoxious bass if you don't want it. And if you want to turn up, if you want to put in DJ Magic Mike or, you know, a bass CD like we did back in 1991, you can do that. And these things will literally pound, and they'll make your subwoofer, your powered subwoofer that you have for your home theater system, the one that was $15,000, you won't even be able to hear it over these. These things pound that hard. But you don't have to. And the way I did that was by the inputs on the back. As you can see on this side, there's a whole lot of inputs, and the reason for that is I wanted to have the option of how the subwoofer was connected. So depending on how the switch over here on the right hand side is set, you can designate if you want the subwoofer to be running at 4 ohms or 1 ohm, or if you put it in the middle so it's on neither, and connect up one of the top and one of the bottom, either the positive here and the negative here, or the negative here and the positive here. It doesn't matter. Either way, that's 2 ohms. So depending on how you configure the back, you can run the subwoofer, the woofers at 4 ohms, 2 ohms, or 1 ohm, however you like. Or if you really want to, you can use both sets of inputs for the woofer, and you can run a separate channel into each voice coil for the woofer. So you can literally power the woofer with 2 amplifiers for that one speaker if you want. The idea here was to give you as many possibilities as possible. Every possible scheme you could concoct can be done really easily with this. It's very simple. Just like the switch, connect them up. You know, you don't even have to change the connection if you want 1 ohm to 4 ohm. You just switch, leave it plugged in. The only thing you have to change is if you want to go to 2 ohms, you have to put it in the middle, and then you have to put either this one up here or this one up here. That's it. The second, or well, I guess the third set of inputs is the inputs that go directly to the mid-range, and then the top set is the input that goes directly to the tweeter. And everything is labeled. I did some acid etched, then anodized brass plaques here to designate what's what. This just says high, mid, and low. And then obviously the switch selector plate over here tells you that's another acid etched brass anodized plate. But you get a ton of different options. But what that means is you can't just plug these in. You can't just take one speaker wire set and plug them into your receiver and listen to them. Not without a crossover. And there is no crossover built into these guys. And the reason I did that was because in order to really maximize these speakers, in order to get where I wanted to get was to build my own L100s, but to make it better than what JBL makes. You have to have the ability to run it with multiple channels of amplification. And anyone who really does professional audio will tell you, you want to have the ability to put a channel of amplification into every driver inside of the cabinet. You don't want to have these two sharing amplification or these three sharing amplification. And there's a lot of reasons for that, mainly because you want it to have as much power as possible. This tweeter can handle 250, 300 watts just for the tweeter. So there's really no excuse for taking 100 watts, 150 watts from a receiver and splitting into these two drivers so that they get 75 watts apiece. It's not doing it. I mean, it'll sound okay, but it won't sound great. It won't be nearly as loud as it could be. So I wanted to shoot for doing a active crossover network on this and to just leave the crossovers out. Looking back on it, I think I'm going to do some passive crossovers so that if somebody decides to buy these, they'll have them as an option. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build some external active crossover or passive crossover boxes and just have them so that you can set them on the top or maybe on the back and then plug the wires in so that everything will be, all the crossover will be there and you can just plug one channel in from your receiver and run the speaker. But if you really want to get the most out of these guys, you have to do an active crossover setup, and for that, hopefully you guys can see this on the camera. That's this box down here. This is a mini DSP HD 4x10. For those of you guys who don't know what mini DSP is, it's a really cool company in Korea, I think, who build really excellent, fairly priced, proprietary designed audio equipment. You know, they do all sorts of different audio equipment, but it's all on the electronic side as far as signal processing, crossovers, room measurements, speaker calibrations, room calibrations. So this is the mini DSP, and what this box is a digital signal processor where you just feed an analog or a digital signal into it, and then you interface it to your computer, you pull it up, and then you can take that signal and you can break it down and split it off into however many outputs you want. So the way I have this running is I just have a digital optical cable running from my computer into the mini DSP, just a single Toslink cable, 1-to-1, and then from the mini DSP I have digital RCAs going out to the amplifiers. I have the woofers running off this crown amplifier here, and then the tweeters and mid-range are running off the NAD. I was considering running the tweeters or one or the other of them off the ADCOM over here, but I decided I would use the ADCOM as the amplification for the other speakers that are down on the floor in case I wanted to switch between which speakers I was using. So that way I could just kind of toggle back and forth if I want to use my small little shrimpy towers or if I want the big guys, depending on how late at night it is, or, you know, if I have a headache or something, maybe, I don't know. But at any rate, so the signal goes into the DSP from the computer. You go into the interface, you connect the two up so that it's live and they're talking back and forth, and you can literally go in and you can program the crossover there so that the crossovers that aren't built into the speaker are basically down at the computer level or the DSP level, and the signals that go out from the DSP into the amplifier are already crossed over and the frequencies are already cleaned up so that when the signal goes out via these speaker cables here and into the ports, they are already ready to go and perfect for what the speaker's looking for. Take a quick look at it. This is the U-mic that mini DSP makes, and this is a calibration mic. It's a really great little tool, and it is pre-calibrated, so not only is it a good mic that's USB connected to your computer, but it's also already calibrated, so you know it's exactly perfectly operating and it's running just the way it should. There's no glitches, there's nothing that's out of whack or out of sync so that your measurements aren't quite right. They're perfect. And all you have to do is go on Mini DSP's website and put your serial number for the microphone in and they will then give you a link to download the specific calibration specs for that exact microphone, which you then input into whatever software you're using for your calibration, and then you know you're just spot on with all your readings and measurements. Right, so let's do some close-ups so you guys can actually get a good close look at the speakers, because up to now I've been kind of doing a bit of a zoomed out look. The first thing really that I wanted to do with the L100 Customs is to use the same overall design as JBL, but to better it. So I decided to, like I said, I built the cabinets using solid hardwood, and hopefully, as you guys can see, the finish is just really gorgeous. Really killer grain in the oak. Really nice. It's supposed to be a high gloss finish lacquer, but it really looks more like a semi-gloss finish to me. That's a lot of coats. Really, there's a ton of character in the wood, and obviously every speaker that you make by hand is going to have a totally different grain pattern. It's going to, it's going to be all its own, totally unique, but I'm super happy with the overall finish of these guys. Here's the inputs and all the brass plates and plaques. Here's all the drivers up close and personal. Is the dome tweeter, the mid-range driver, and the 12-inch woofer. A really large airport, a 4.5-inch wide and 12.5 to 13-inch deep port. Another little bit of brass logoing going on there, and the connectors to hold the front grille on. And then I just did a really nice matte black finish on the whole front, top to bottom. Just kind of an unobtrusive look. And now connecting it back up is simple. That set of wires is the tweeter or the highs. This is the mids. And this is the lows. And like I was explaining before, you can do these totally different if you want. Like if you want to do 2 ohms, put that there, put this here, 2 ohms. Or you could put this here and put this here, 2 ohms. Or you could put that there and then do this, and now you have 2 channels going into 1 speaker. The woofer is using 2 channels of amplification, 1 into each coil, and it's 2 ohms apiece. But we're not going to do that because that's kind of overkill for what we're doing. The other option is to go up here for 1 ohm, and you just leave this as is. But there's no reason to push the amplifier that I'm using down to 1 ohm, because at 4 ohms, 1 channel is getting 1200 watts from this crown amp right here, so it is more than sufficient. Put the gains up a little bit. Gains were down at like 30%. I'll put them up to 50%. This is the mini DSP I was showing you guys, and then the NAD down here is what's running the tweeters and the mid-ranges. Let's see. When I set this tripod up, and I will show you guys real quick how the DSP software works, because this is the next big difference in how I wanted to make these and make them better than the JBL version. Because it's an active crossover instead of a passive crossover, that means that I can go in and use the mini DSP hardware and then use this software here to totally customize how these individual speakers sound and how they sound as a whole system. So the way it's set up is the first two channels are tweeter left right and mid left right and then woofer left right, and each channel has its own crossover. So I've got the tweeters running from 4,000 hertz to 20,000 hertz with a 30 decibel per octave slope at the high pass side and then a 48 decibel on the low pass side. The mid-range is running from 330 hertz up to 2,500 hertz with a 24 and 36 decibel slope, and then the woofers running from 20 to 80 hertz with 48 decibel and then a 12 decibel slope. And some of you may ask, what's up with that 12 decibel slope? That seems a little weird. It's because the frequency output curve of this woofer literally looks exactly like this curve right here. So I just basically copied the exact frequency output curve that JBL gave me in the manual and the tech spec data sheet. That's exactly what it looked like, and with those exact numbers at that exact volume. So I know that's what it's going to sound the best at. I know that's what it's supposed to do and it's designed to do, so I just put it right there. I would have done the same for the tweeter in the mid, but I haven't yet managed to get a hold of the spec data sheets from JBL for those. Hopefully they'll come in soon. I'm still waiting for them to email them to me, but either way, it doesn't really matter because they sound great already. Then you can do, for each, obviously as you can see here, for each channel, you have individual volume gains. So right now I have the tweeter up by 2 decibels, the mid's down by 2 decibels, and the woofers flat at 0. But I can crank any of them up 12 decibels or down 72. And then I can also mute each channel independently. I can invert them and change the phase of each channel independently, and I can go into each channel independently and put in basically an equalizer. So I can go in there and I can do peak filters, I can do low and high shelf filters, I can do gains, but at specific frequencies. So I can make this, right now I haven't done anything with the equalizer as you can see, but I can make this do all sorts of crazy stuff in here, so that depending on what frequency is specifically getting hit, I can bump the response up or I can take it down a notch depending on how that driver specifically performs. And that's where this microphone comes in. So when you're doing your speaker configuration, you want to use the microphone to record the test tone for each individual component and then analyze what it recorded and see, what it outputs, and find out where any artifacts or troughs or wave gates or anything like that, frequency gates are, and kind of basically make up for them. You make up for basically artifacts and problems with the room, because of how the room is designed, shaped, built, whatever. There may be little weird artifacts because of the room, but there may also be artifacts and strengths or weaknesses of the speaker depending on what it's playing at certain levels in certain areas. So you can use this to really hone in and, you know, help the speaker out, turn it up, turn it down, or cut out some content at points where it's really strong or really weak to make it sound even that much better. This stuff, doing the equalizer and doing the configuration is really, I don't want to say it's overkill because it isn't. It's useful, it's awesome, but it is what it is like, you know, a fine-toothed comb type last step when you really are done and it sounds terrific and you've got it, you know, you've got your crossovers set just right, you've got your speakers wired, your cabinets built just right, everything sounds awesome, no air leaks, no vibrations, no nothing. Then if you want to make it sound even better, that's when you can go in and do the calibration, the correction, and try to get just that last little, you know, 5 to 10% out of your speaker system. But you can skip this step, and as you can see from here, I haven't even done it yet. I have done it yet, but not on this configuration. And you're really not even going to miss it if your speakers are built correctly. If you did a good job building them, if you don't configure it, if you don't calibrate it, you're probably going to be more than perfectly happy anyhow. But if you do configure it, you do go in and calibrate it and tweak it and add different notch filters and peak filters, whatever, adjust the gains, you can just make it that much better. And you can, you know, correct for a poor room configuration. Like, you know, for example, this room and where these speakers are, as you can see, it's got all sorts of stuff going on, and the speakers really shouldn't be, you know, one there and one here. This speaker should be 3 feet out from where it is, and this speaker should be all the way over there. I mean, if it's stereo, right? So in this room and in this setting, we're gonna have all sorts of weird artifacts and, you know, not so subtle issues with the way the sound is because of the shape of this room. So I could use the calibration mic to, you know, to somewhat correct that. You can't correct everything, but you can certainly help it quite a bit. So that's what it's for. And I will, when I do my final calibration, I will do a video on that to show you guys how that works, because it's really cool, it's really easy with the software and the technology available to us all today. It's really easy to do, and it's something that 10 years ago was really hard to do, and you really had to know what you were doing. You had to have an education, or, you know, have taken some classes and really learned how to configure and calibrate sound systems and speakers. But these days you don't, you really don't. You just need to spend an hour or two looking into it, learning and researching, and then it, you know, the software really does it for you for the most part. And I'm not going to say that my job of calibrating is going to be as good a calibration as if I hired a professional, but I am going to say it's probably damn close, and in some cases it's probably better. But, you know, I'm certainly not a pro by any means as far as speaker calibration goes, but you don't, what I'm saying is you don't need to be, because the software that's available today really does it all for you. As long as you know what you're doing and you know how to use the software, it's really gonna do the work for you. And that's just super cool. So I guess probably the best way to finish this video out is to just play out some tunes. Unless you guys listen to the last 6 or 7 songs on my playlist here, and you guys can decide for yourself what you think of the speakers. Let Michael start off. And of course, thank you guys as always for watching. Vincent Price is so awesome. He really is.
Get up in the morning, sleeping for rest. so that every mouth can be fed. Oh, me Israelites. Get up in the morning, slaving for bread, sir, so that every mouth can be fed. Oh, me Israelite. One man gets up and I leave me. Darling, she said I was yours to receive. Oh, me Israelite. Shut them a tear up choices ago. I don't want to end up like Bonnie and Clyde. Oh, me Israelite. The rest of them must be your call. Catch me in the palm, you sound your alarm. Oh, Israelite.
Alright, so the last thing I want to show you guys is how the woofers can perform. The woofers being one of the other major upgrades that I did to these guys versus the L100 Classics. Dual voice coil versus single voice coils, much bigger voice coils and bigger magnets on these guys, and a much better frequency response curve. I've got them still set up and running at 4 ohms, 1200 watts going into each one. I didn't turn them down to 1 ohm or 2 ohms or anything like that, but I did turn the gain on the amp that's powering them way up, just so you guys can see. And I'm not even really going to turn the volume up much, it doesn't need to, but just watch the movement on the woofers to get an idea. And remember, this is a ported box, so in a ported box, the woofers don't even usually move very much.
Lig wakker in mijn bed, mijn hoofd vol met gedachten. De tijd ik langs en door, slapeloze nachten. In de zon breekt langs en door, mijn ogen reeds gesloten. Denken als ik slaap, ben ik even weg van al mijn dromen. In de slapeloze nachten, ligt te staren in het duister. Met de eindeloze droom.
It doesn't even sound bad, despite the fact that the gain is up way higher on the woofers than it is on the tweets and the mids. Probably the type of music has something to do with it. Woo Assassins theme song, love this song. Snoop Dogg is always good.
Who you gon' call? Took his last breath. Thriller in Manila, I'm a killer and a chef. Clashing with a passion. Top-notch assassin. Stand him up, set him down. Run away, I'm running down. I spin around and kick him down. High brothers, dog pound.
Right, so you guys get the idea. Basically, versatile. They don't have to be cranked up like that. They can be mild-mannered and sound really good. But if you're throwing a party and you really want to turn them up and let it rip, they are essentially pro speakers. I mean, it's very similar to what you get at a concert. Tweeters would be a little bit bigger in a concert show, but other than that, pretty similar. But you know, they're very easy to set up in lots of different ways, depending on what you want for them. Critical listening, party speakers, front speakers for your movie theater room, workshop speakers, whatever you're looking for, these guys can do it. And they can do it well. I guess that's about it. Oh, you know what else is worth mentioning? Power. So, if you're going to do something like this, and you really want to get the most out of your system, you need to make sure that you've got plenty of power going on. And by power, I don't mean the amplifiers, I mean the actual power coming into the system from the wall. So, let's say most wall outlets in most places, especially residential, are going to be 10 or 15 amps on that circuit with the circuit breaker. And it's going to be running, you know, probably a whole room, so all the electrics in that room are going to be sharing that one 15 amp breaker. So if you have a dedicated setup like what I've got here with computer and audio in my workshop, and you really want to get the most out of it, ideally what you want to do is you want to set up your own independent circuit breaker to run all that stuff in and nothing else in it, which is great for multiple reasons. You get lots of power, and the amplifiers can really do what they're supposed to do without any power limitations, but you also get much cleaner power and cleaner signal because there's nothing else that's getting plugged into those outlets that might create weird ground loops or other weird artifacts to introduce noise into your lines, especially if you have analog stuff going on. If your stuff's all digital, you probably don't have to worry about it, but nothing is all digital. There's always some analog somewhere. So if you're doing this, like what I have here, the only thing that is on the 20 amp circuit that I have dedicated for this audio is just the DSP, the 2 amplifiers. That's it. On the next circuit over, I've got the computer, the printers, and stuff like that. So nothing else except for, you know, the 3 things that are strictly audio related, nothing else. And doing that gives me 20 amps of headroom that I can use to power the 2 amplifiers and the DSP, and that the crown amplifier, like I said, is 1200 watts a channel or higher depending on if I turn the ohms down, so that's really going to suck a lot of power. I mean, it's a very efficient amp because it's, you know, it's a new Class I supposedly digital amplifier. It's not a traditional push-pull analog amp, so it doesn't burn off a ton of heat and waste a ton of electricity. You know, your standard classic amp, even the NAD that's going on down here, that guy is a really, really nice receiver with a really, really nice amp, but it's still a traditional kind of push-pull Class D amplifier. So, you know, 40% of the electricity that amplifier pulls out of the wall is being converted into heat and wasted. So it's not all going into the actual watts that are going into the speakers. Whereas the crown, I don't know if it's really a Class I or if it's just a much better digital amplifier. That's doing a whole lot better job not wasting electricity in the form of heat. You know, it's probably getting more like 80% of the power that's pulling from the wall and turning it into speaker sound, and only wasting like 20%. But if you don't have really nice digital equipment and you're using traditional equipment, a 15 amp breaker that's being shared with all the electronics in that room is really a limiting factor. If your receiver says it's seven channels at 150 watts a channel, there's no way it's going to get anywhere near that if you only have a 15 amp circuit breaker and it's a shared breaker that a whole bunch of stuff is plugged into. Because 40% of that 15 amp breaker is getting wasted in heat. So that cuts you down to a 8 amp breaker to run that receiver. And that NAD receiver right there has a 12 amp draw current at maximum. So that means in that situation, in that scenario, it can't even run at full power, even if it wanted to, because there's only 8 amps available to it after the inefficient heat wastage is taken into account, and that doesn't take into account all the other stuff that's running on that circuit breaker. So, like I said, ideally, if you can, the best thing to do is set up a dedicated line. Show you guys what I did. This guy right here, super duper thick UL outdoor cable going into a heavy duty 20 amp plug with a line filter in line, and then this guy goes into a UPS, a uninterrupted power supply. I would say I'll show you guys. Yeah, I can show you guys actually. UPS is down here. Hopefully you guys can see them. There's 2 of them mounted up underneath the cabinet here. One of them is for audio and one of them is for computer. So basically, everything's plugged into the UPS, and then the UPS is being fed by the line conditioner, which is being fed directly by the 20 amp circuit breaker that has got nothing else running on it. So that means for me, I have essentially a full 20 amps of power that these amps can use when I turn the volume up, and that means that the NAD, if it's looking for the 11 amps maximum that it can actually run, it's got the full 11 available to it with 9 amps left over for the crown to run on, and the crown doesn't, I don't think it's anywhere near a 9 amp draw. I think it's 6 to 8 at maximum. Yeah, so that's about it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys like the speakers. I know I do. If anyone is interested, they are going to be available for sale as soon as I finish calibrating them. That should be done tomorrow or the next day. And stay tuned. I've got a Raven lightsaber that I just finished up for Cameron. I'm going to do a video on tonight and hopefully post tomorrow. Alright, take care guys.